universe is still a place of mystery and wonder. As a cosmologist, I'm exhilarated that we can make some progress towards tackling what seem very fundamental questions. These programs focus on: was there a beginning? Whether we are alone? What's the future of the cosmos? What is the nature of reality? With each advance, new questions come into sharper focus. The key issue is what we still don't know. We have no idea how widespread intelligence is in the cosmos. From our present knowledge, the most complex things we know about in the universe are ourselves. In particular, our brains. What's remarkable is that atoms have assembled into entities which are somehow able to ponder their origins.
We have always been fascinated by our existence. Of all the wonders of creation, life is the most mysterious. And of all creatures, we are the most special. Surely there has to be a reason. Religion offers a simple explanation. God created everything, and only God knows why we are here. Science came to a different conclusion. It found no evidence for a grand plan. Yet recent discoveries have made scientists think again. It seems ancient notions may be closer to the truth than science has ever imagined. Perhaps there is, after all, a creator, and creation may not be what we think it is. Every religion has its own fantastic story to explain our creation. From God making the universe in 6 days, to an endless cycle of universes created from dead ones, to the whole universe being created in a single divine breath. And one idea underpins all these beliefs. Human beings have a special place in this universe. We are here for a purpose. But as science investigated our origins, a creator became unnecessary, and our special place less special.
Historically, we humans have undergone a series of demotions, a series of blows to our ego. First, we sort of took for granted that everything was centered on us. Most religions and mythologies sort of reflect that. And then, of course, we realized that the world was much bigger than we thought. We realized that we're not the center of the universe, we're just living on a spinning ball, which is one planet among many, in a solar system among many, in a galaxy among many. So, you might think at that point we should all just commit collective suicide and depression.
When cosmologists investigated our creation, they uncovered a process guided by the laws of physics. In the beginning, there was gas, made of simple atoms. Over time, stars transformed these elements into complex atoms. As these heavier atoms spread throughout the universe, they combined to create everything we can see. This whole process was driven not by a creator, but by fundamental physical laws, the laws of nature. Among these laws were values for the speed of light, the force of gravity, and the charge carried by electrons.
The difference between the law of nature and the law of the land is that, no matter what your political persuasion is, we all obey them, whether we like it or not. There's no exceptions to the laws of nature.
The precise values for the fundamental laws of nature were set at the very beginning of our universe, in the Big Bang. The rest was just mathematics.
The Big Bang was, in a sense, rather simple. You can write down a rather short recipe. From that, you could, in principle, if you had a powerful enough computer, work out what would happen and end up with something rather like our universe.
But could it really be that simple? Mathematics might explain how planets form, but not everything. Surely the evolution of life was still mysterious, still special.
People think that mathematics is complicated. Mathematics is the simple bit. It's the stuff we can understand. It's cats that are complicated. I mean, what is it in those little molecules and stuff that make one cat behave differently to another, or that make a cat? How do you define a cat? I have no idea.
Yet in 1970, John Conway showed that even though life may be baffling in its complexity, the complexity arises from simple rules. The evidence came from a game whose results were so unpredictable that they called it life. Life had the most basic of ingredients, a board with a grid of squares filled with counters. The fate of each counter was governed by rules. Unlike our universe, there were just 3.
I had this idea that if you had simple rules, but not too simple, then probably complexity would just develop. We tinkered with the rules and played around and hoped something interesting would happen. And eventually we settled on the particular set of rules that we did. They were sort of slightly modelled on real life.
The 3 rules they arrived at were the equivalents of birth, death, and survival. What would happen to any particular square depended on its neighbours. An empty square with exactly 3 counters around it would give birth, so a new counter is added to the board. Any counter with too few neighbours would die of isolation and be removed from the board. A counter with too many neighbours would die of suffocation and also be removed. And any counter with just 2 or 3 neighbours would survive, staying exactly as it was. With only these most basic rules, unpredictable and complex patterns evolved. The board seemed to produce creatures from nowhere. Creatures that crawled. Creatures that fired out smaller creatures. Pumps that looked like a primitive heart. Creatures that spewed out an endless chain of offspring.
My little life game is surprising because from the simple rules, one wouldn't expect to find things that move in a sort of purposive manner and surprise us. That's, I suppose, why we call it life. It mimics life to that tiny extent. Like a little mini-universe.
Science dismantled the notion of life created with a purpose. In this rational universe, there's no need for a creator.
There was no design in life, no design whatsoever. It behaves interestingly just as a consequence of random behavior.
In this random universe, there is no special purpose in our evolution. We are simply the result of atoms, time, and mathematics. Yet some cosmologists still see a greater meaning in our existence. They do not agree that we are coincidental to the universe. The universe, they argue, is irrelevant without us.
If you look at the cosmos, right? Sure, we're small, but suppose there were no life in the universe. Wouldn't all this beautiful stuff out there be a complete waste if there were no one there to behold it? I think so. I think it's only life which gives any sort of meaning to the universe. And particularly if we turn out to be the only life in the observable universe.
It is called anthropic reasoning. Our creation is still driven by mathematics and the laws of nature. But there is something mysterious, indeed very special, in the laws of nature themselves.
It looks in some respects as though our universe is rather special. We know the universe allowed our emergence, but it's quite easy to imagine a universe with slightly different properties, in which neither we nor anything as complicated as us could exist. We can imagine, as it were, turning the knobs which were set up at the time of the Big Bang to determine how it expanded and what it was made of. And if we turn the knobs very slightly, we find that we would end up with a universe that would not be so propitious for the emergence of life.
Take gravity, perhaps the most familiar of the laws of nature. Its value determines how much things are attracted to each other. From us being stuck to the Earth circling our sun, to the stars held in place in remote galaxies billions of light years away. Just the tiniest adjustment to the value of gravity in a computer simulation of the Big Bang, and our universe doesn't emerge at all.
For example, if gravity were very strong, then anything as big as us would get crushed. If there were no gravity at all, then no stars would be able to form because they're held together by gravity. No planets either.
And the other laws are equally fine-tuned. Any slight adjustment to their value, and we would never exist. There is no known reason why these values should be set as they are, yet they do seem to be fine-tuned to allow our creation.
To some of us, not all, to some of us, it looks like we have to live with the idea that the constants of nature, the laws of nature, everything that we know about, somehow was influenced by our own existence. This is something which physicists hate the idea of. Most physicists want the world to be controlled by pure mathematics, not by our own existence.
Perhaps there is a rational explanation for why the laws of nature were set so precisely at the birth of our universe. Until we fully understand those first moments, we should not assume any special reason for their values.
When we trace cosmic history back towards the so-called Big Bang, as we get closer to the very beginning, we become more and more uncertain. That's because conditions then become more extreme. We lose our foothold in experiment because conditions are more extreme than we can simulate or achieve in any experiment on Earth. So there are great uncertainties.
For a while, mainstream cosmologists were content that once we understood better the underlying reason for the laws being set as they are, fine-tuning would no longer seem so mystical, and would once again fall within the realms of physics and mathematics.
The general view of this, for most physicists, is that these fine-tunings are largely accidental, that the constants of nature are determined by some mathematical principles which have nothing whatever to do with our existence. Impersonal, mathematical, and we were just incredibly lucky that that mathematics happened to give rise to a universe with all this kind of fine-tuning, just precisely so.
And so the anthropic principle existed as an interesting but eccentric theory. But then, quite unexpectedly, a completely new law of nature was discovered. And our universe relied on this law being so precisely tuned that it seemed no rational theory would ever explain it.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while, it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant. And when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything gets bad. And the physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion. Otherwise, the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the anthropic scientists did not want to entertain.
There's some people who love mystery and really enjoy not having all the answers. And then there are other people who fear mystery and uncertainty and just want all the answers and to get on with it. And they will be delighted if you give them a little book, whether it be Mao's Little Red One or some particular religious book that says, here's all the answers, okay, now go off to work and don't worry about this anymore, it's all taken care of. Many people find a certain security and solace in that.
The scientists were between a rock and a hard place. Their own discoveries were pointing them towards an intelligent designer.
Physicists' dislike of mixing religion into physics. I think they were somewhat afraid that if it was admitted that the reason the world is the way it is has to do with our own existence, that could be hijacked by the creationists, by the intelligent designers. And of course, what they would say is, yes, we always told you so. There is a benevolent somebody way up high in the universe who created the universe exactly so that we could live. I think physicists shrank at the idea of getting involved in such things.
Some people say that this apparent fine-tuning of the universe is a brute fact. We wouldn't be here to worry about the issue otherwise, and that's the way things are. Others are a bit more perplexed and invoke providence or a creator to explain that things were set up with the aim of producing a complex universe. Some people are satisfied with a religious explanation, whereas I think it is a scientific question which deserves to be addressed by cosmologists.
And cosmologists have found a solution to the fine-tuning problem. It is simple and elegant, but it requires a leap of faith as profound as any religious belief. If our planet is not alone, if it is one of billions of planets, orbiting billions of stars in hundreds of billions of galaxies inside our universe, could our universe also be one of many?
It may turn out that our concept of the universe, as astronomers see it now, is a very restrictive one. And what we have traditionally called our universe is one of many.
If there are other universes, their laws of nature could all be set differently in their own Big Bangs.
If there have been many Big Bangs, and if, and this is the second assumption, the outcome of those Big Bangs were universes governed by different physical laws, then we could imagine that there would be one universe governed by any particular law we care to envisage. And therefore, it would not be at all surprising if there should be one universe that was tuned.
If our laws of nature are only one set of values amongst a limitless possibility of others, then the fine-tuning of our universe once again falls within the laws of chance. Our law of gravity would be but one of trillions of different values for gravity. The same goes for the cosmic constant, for atomic charge, even the numbers of dimensions. Suddenly, amongst all the many possibilities, it's not so surprising that at least one possesses the precise set of laws that allow human beings to evolve.
If you go into a clothes shop and there's a large stock, you're not surprised to find one suit that fits. Whereas if there's only one suit, you are surprised. So many universes governed by different laws would remove any reason for surprise at the apparent fine-tuning in our universe.
With one mighty intellectual bound, cosmologists could once again happily accept that our universe suited our existence precisely, without the need for a fine-tuner, a creator. Martin Rees coined a new word to describe the idea.
If it turns out that there's more to reality than just our Big Bang, or the aftermath of our Big Bang, then we have to either redefine our universe or use another word, and I've chosen the word multiverse, to describe this whole ensemble of big bangs, this whole ensemble of universes.
The concept of the multiverse saves the scientific universe at a stroke.
We now have a natural mechanism to explain why there is all this diversity out there, which in turn eliminates the need for the fine-tuning that some people might have liked because it would say that there was a fine-tuner. We don't need a fine-tuner.
Yet theoretically, these other universes will always be beyond the scope of our telescopes. So is the multiverse really a scientific solution?
One thing which people often object to when confronted with the whole multiverse idea is saying this can't be science, talking about all these things you can't see. If I have a theory involving entities that I can never touch, never measure, never observe, that's not science then, is it? And I'd say quite to the contrary. What makes good science is not whether you can see it or not, but whether you can rule out the theory or not.
Having raised the possibility of other universes, cosmologists started to wonder what they might be like. And as they wondered, they found logic had set another trap. The multiverse idea had set them on a path that led them back, once again, to a creator. To avoid the conclusion that an intelligent force had had a hand in our creation, cosmologists invoked the principle of multiple universes. But what potential might those other universes hold for the evolution of complexity?
We have no idea how much variety other universes might display, and since we have no contact with them, all we can say is that there must be certain potential for complexity in those universes. It's easy to imagine universes that would be less propitious for life than ours, but of course we may not be in the optimum universe in a sense. We can imagine universes that might be more propitious. These of course will be potentialities far beyond the powers of our brains to conceive, but we can't assume in this grander cosmos that there couldn't be other universes displaying more complexity than ours.
Although we are completely cut off from these other universes, it's not impossible that one day we might be able to prove their existence.
I think it's a question that we can't even address at the present. I think we simply have to rely on the ingenuity of future generations of physicists, or whatever they are call themselves at that time, to find their way into new ways of thinking about these things. The atomic theory was put forward by ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago. It took a couple of thousand years to verify it. It would not surprise me if it takes some fraction of that kind of time before we really absolutely understand these ideas, before we become totally comfortable with these ideas, before we say these ideas are hard, absolutely hard science.
But can we ever know what these other universes are like? Somewhere, among this infinite collection, there must be those similar to our own. And some of them will be less evolved, and others much more advanced.
We have some concept of how on Earth life has evolved and has from simple beginnings led to creatures like ourselves with at least a certain level of intelligence. There seems to have been a gradual increase in intelligence, and human beings at some stage surpassed other creatures, but we have no idea how inevitable that was. The the 4 billion years of Darwinian evolution are now part of common culture. But most people nonetheless tend to think that human beings are in some sense the culmination. There's no particular reason to think that intelligence couldn't develop further. Astronomers know that our sun is less than halfway through its life. It'll be 6 billion years before the sun flares up, engulfing the inner planets, vaporizing any life that remains on Earth. But any life that remains at that time won't be humans. It'll be life at least as different from us as we are from bacteria, because there's as much time for future evolution on Earth and beyond before the sun dies as there has been to get from the simplest organisms to us.
So our future in this universe can tell us something about life in other more advanced universes. So what is the future for intelligence?
I think we have the most complex nervous system on Earth. Related to that, we may consider us as the most intelligent species on Earth. Maybe in the universe, at least our universe, that could be. We started with a chimpanzee-like brain, and it tripled in size over a period of 2 to 3 million years. You wonder whether there's any expansion possible.
Michael Hoffman has studied the structure of our brain and asked, would a larger brain increase intelligence?
We did a study by comparing brain structures in primates, starting from very small, relatively primitive primates up to human beings. What you can do then is to extrapolate these findings to creatures which even have a larger brain than we had. To our surprise, after a particular brain size, something strange happened. There is some maximum in intelligence, in processing power, in cognitive abilities, but beyond that point, you find a decrease in number of structures in the brain. It will go along with a decrease in processing power and information processing, and therefore also with intelligence.
It seems that as the organ of intelligence, the brain has reached its limit. If it becomes bigger, communication between the different parts of the brain slow down, and it actually becomes less efficient.
So it can't hardly be better than we do it now. That's in fact the conclusion of all these calculations. We can't change the technology of our brain. In a way, we are prisoners of our ancestors a million years ago, as far as the evolution of the brain is concerned.
So unless nature invents a new way for organic intelligence to evolve, it seems that in this universe, intelligence has reached its potential. But some scientists see organic intelligence as only the first stage in evolution, and the next stage, they believe, has already begun.
For the first 3 or nearly 4 billion years, the driving force of increasing complexity on Earth was evolution, natural selection, sexual selection. But in recent times, in the last few thousand years, it's not evolution any longer, but it's our cultural development that has taken over. And now this has been formalized into scientific and technological and medical development. That's where the action is right now. If we become more intelligent, it is because we will learn to use technology or maybe medicine to enhance our own intellectual capacities. And that might happen within a matter of decades. In all these different ways, human beings will use their technical ingenuity to change and modify their own nature. That's the transhuman phase of our development, which we're just beginning to enter at the dawn of this new millennium.
Technology already infiltrates almost every aspect of our lives. But philosophers like Nick Bostrom believe that technology could gradually replace our lives, and that the change will be almost imperceptible.
A lot of people might choose to change to a different medium, computational hardware medium, where you wouldn't suffer aging, where your processes of thinking could be speeded up enormously, where you could transport yourself at the speed of light as information pattern, where you could make copies, backup copies of yourselves. You would start by replacing a small bit of the brain, maybe a single nerve cell, with a computer processor that would do the same thing, and then you could replace larger and larger parts, and eventually you would consist of silicon. And that sounds really scary and bad, but if at no point in this process you noticed any difference, and if you ended up with just the same mental life as you had before, then you might think it doesn't really matter so much whether I'm made of silicon or carbon, what's inside my skull, or indeed whether I have a skull or my whole mental life is implemented on a computer. But what matters rather is what you think and feel and do and how you relate to others.
Technology could take intelligence beyond the natural capacity of our biological brains. Through technology, our universe could evolve superintelligence.
The concept of superintelligence roughly means any kind of intellect that vastly outstrips anything that's possible for humans to do. It wouldn't just be a really clever human. It would be a large, by a huge amount, superior to us. There wouldn't be a confusion about whether it really was very smart or not. It would be on a completely different level.
We obviously can't conceive of what a superintelligence might be able to achieve any more than a dog can appreciate quantum mechanics. But we can at least quantify things by thinking about computers. We can think about the processing power of computers and the kind of calculations they can do, the degree of complexity they can simulate. We know that over a few decades, computers have evolved from being able to simulate only very simple patterns to being able to create virtual worlds, as it were, with quite a lot of detail in them.
And if the computers in this new era are powerful enough, they will be able to simulate the events at the very start of our universe, to test the underlying principle that set our laws of nature so precisely, to play with the parameters of creation, to see what might evolve.
If that trend were to continue, then we can imagine computers which will be able to simulate worlds perhaps even as complicated as one we think we're living in. Of course, this raises a philosophical question: could we ourselves be in such a simulation? Could what we think is the universe be some sort of vault of heaven rather than a real thing?
In a multiverse, there would almost certainly be beings that have evolved intelligence way beyond ours, with the power to run immensely complicated simulations. Our whole universe could be one of those simulations. So where does that leave us?
In a sense, we could be ourselves the creations within this simulation, I suppose.
In cutting themselves free from the possibility of our universe being the work of a creator, a god, logic has taken science back to where it started. Could our superintelligence be the god we have always imagined?
Well, the simulation hypothesis, which is that we are currently living in a computer simulation, should be understood literally. It's not just in a metaphorical sense, whereby one could view the universe as a simulation, but literally we would be living in a simulation created by some advanced civilization in a computer that they have built in their universe. And everything we see and our brains themselves would just be parts of this simulation.
And if we are simulations, might we have been simulated for a purpose? Might our existence not be down to chance? Might there after all be a creator with a grand design, just as our ancestors believed?
The simulation argument is based on empirical considerations about the levels of computing power that would be available to an advanced civilization. Of course, it couldn't even be conceptualized before we had concept of a computer. So it's really only in the last several decades that the hypothesis could even be entertained.
The creatures crawling across the board in the game of life are little more than blips of data. Nevertheless, they lend eerie support to the simulation hypothesis.
The rules of my life game are tiny, trivial things. And the rules, of the real universe are so hard that we've been trying to understand them for thousands of years and, haven't finished yet by any means. So one can't really expect too much, but already these tiny, trivial laws exhibit interesting behavior. It proved an important point, which is that a system like this could have some of the properties of the real universe. So in a way, its design was copied, but in a very trivial way, from real-life biology. And so it's rather nice that, correspondingly, it became a kind of artificial biology.
We can't be certain to what extent the actual laws governing the natural world are similar to those in the game of life. We do know that the laws governing the natural world are simple. We can write them down in simple equations. We can program computers to simulate them. And from great simplicity, we derive immense complexity.
And if our existence is inside a simulation, are we real at all?
Speculations about the nature of reality and whether it might be an illusion or a dream goes back for hundreds of years or thousands of years. Philosophers have been pondering these questions. If we are in a simulation, does that mean that nothing is real? I think a better way of viewing it is that it would mean that reality is something slightly different than we thought. For most practical intents and purposes, you would still behave as you would do anyway.
We have no reason to get depressed by sort of philosophical implications of these things, because the everyday aspects of life are always going to feel the same, regardless of whether we actually have free will or not, regardless of whether the universe is going to end in a big rip or a big crunch, And I think for all the thinking we humans like to do about the big things, what really, really gets to us emotionally are the everyday little things. And they are what they are.
If we are a simulation, then in the ways that matter to us, we are real enough. Whatever force has guided our creation, mathematical or intelligent, it has constructed from simple atoms a creature capable of thinking beyond the limits of physical investigation.
These kinds of arguments show at the same time the limitations to the reach of the human intellect, in that we're discovering how our little corner of the world might indeed just be a small corner of a vastly bigger world than we never imagined. And that we might never, even in principle, be able to reach out and look at the other parts. And at the same time, these arguments also emphasize the astounding reach of the human intellect, in that we can begin to formulate theories and hypotheses that extend way beyond the world around us that we're evolved to cope with. How many lions entered the cave? Will it rain later this afternoon? What does that person think of me? These kind of very down-to-earth issues that our brain evolved, but it turns out that they can be used to begin to grapple with these fundamental questions of existence and the nature of the world.
In searching for an alternative explanation to the religious accounts of our creation, cosmologists have uncovered a possibility that seems incredibly similar. An all-powerful, all-knowing, super-intelligent being. An entity whose motives are unfathomable and whose existence is unprovable.
It's very important for us physicists to not dismiss ideas just because they are weird. Because if we did, we would have already dismissed atoms, black holes, and all sorts of other marvelous things. And actually, when you ask a basic question about the nature of reality, don't you expect an answer which is a bit weird? I think anything but weird would be a big letdown. And so frankly, I think, let's just accept that the universe is weird and view that as part of its charm.
There's no particular reason why our human brain should have evolved just far enough to be able to assimilate the deepest levels of reality. What is amazing is that we've been able to make so much sense as we have of the external world. I believe when the history of science is written, then what's been discovered about our universe in the last decade or two will be one of the most exciting chapters. But the key question, of course, is what we still don't know, and that is the challenge for the coming century.
To take part in a live web chat with Astronomer Royal Sir Martin Rees, go to channel4.com/science, where he's waiting now to answer your questions on the mysteries of the universe. Next on 4, the tale of a legendary moment in pop, the Band-Aid story.